Hello and welcome to our Facebook Live from the Magnificent Midlife page. And I'm absolutely delighted today to introduce you to Val Hemminger, who is a Canadian divorce lawyer. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, oh, why do I need to know about Canadian divorce law? Well, the point of this is that while jurisdictions may differ and law may be different in different places around the world, the basics of how to do it well and how not to do it badly are pretty universal. So that's why we're doing it with Val today. So Val, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so I've been a divorce lawyer for more than 2 decades. And so what I can say is, like, in Canada, our law has changed a lot over the last 2 decades as well. And we have different, we're very different from the United States in many ways, very different from the UK, as I understand it, in many ways. And at the same time, what I would say is the divorce process, in terms of the woman or the being and how to make sure that that goes okay. I think a lot of that, so like the non-legal law part, but the human part can be very, very similar.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm convinced it is.
Oh yeah, totally.
So if we kick off right at the beginning, and by the way, people, if you have a question, feel free to ask it in the comments. I understand that this is quite a sensitive topic, and we are live on the page rather than a private group. So if you want to ask a question anonymously, feel free to message me on Facebook, and I will go off in a bit. If you see me looking off to the side, that's because I'm looking to see if there are any messages for me. So feel free to ask any questions, but if you are happy to just say hello, tell us where you're from and say hello in the comments, because then we know you're there. So I'm going to kick off first off with, what is the first thing a woman should do if she thinks that her marriage or her relationship has broken down?
Well, okay, so it depends on the situation. And what I mean by that is, first of all, if there's safety concerns, and she's going to know, right? Like, if she's actually afraid of her husband, I'm just, afraid of how he might react. So what she wants to do is a couple of things. Number one, she wants to make sure she's safe, that her and her kids are safe, that her pets are safe, right? So, just to make sure that any kind of issue that way is dealt with. And that, I wouldn't say that happens in a lot of cases, that's a concern, no matter how difficult or how dysfunctional a relationship may have become. In my experience, most women aren't actually afraid of their spouses. So safety concerns, one thing, but assuming that that's not the problem, one of the things that I would want to do is really make sure that you have at least some money or access to money that's not joint. Okay. So here's the thing. Sometimes I have clients who they've done everything joint. They have a joint credit card, they have joint bank accounts, they have joint line of credit. And then what happens is, when they pull the pin on the relationship, see, the thing is, there's a lot of fear in our culture. There's a lot of misunderstandings about entitlement and all that kind of stuff. So people, so then what could end up happening is the husband goes to work. Oh my God, she left me. And his buddies are saying, shut down the credit cards, like do all the things. So then she's left with no money and no access. So then it's really, the way I look at that is, when you're on an airplane and they say, make sure you have the oxygen mask on first before you help the next guy. Well, it's really hard to think clearly if you don't, I hope my dog doesn't bark. It's really hard to think clearly if you're wondering where you're going to get your next sandwich, or keeping the heat on, or the rent, or whatever. So just, you don't even have to, like, just a line of credit, a credit card. If you're established at all, you'll at least have some kind of money. And I would actually recommend also enough to at least get some legal advice underway too.
Brilliant.
So that would be the first thing that you would do. Just kind of make sure you have that foundation,
Yeah. So if you have any questions or comments, please do either ask them in the comments if you've just joined us since we started. But also, if you want to be anonymous about asking your questions, and I understand that you might want to because it's a sensitive topic, I know, but please feel free to send me a direct message. And if you see me looking off to the side like this, it's because I'm going to check whether there are any messages for me. But if you're, happy to ask questions in the comments, then just do that, and I will hopefully keep track of those. So my next question is, Val, what's the most important thing not to do?
Oh my God. Okay. So this is so funny. Okay. So, well, I've got a list, but one of the things that's really important to do. Okay. So if your husband is challenging or difficult or combative, it is totally important to not make any kind of first offer of settlement. Okay. So that's really important. Okay. The reason why is if they are difficult or combative or challenging or even hurt, and they're not like, they don't have their oxygen mask on for whatever reason, they're going through a lot of fear, that kind of thing. Whatever you tell them, say, hey, this is what, I'm just wanting to settle. And you might have the most reasonable settlement, even where you're leaving a lot on the table just because you want to be out of it and not have to go on with the conflict. He's not going to take that because he's going to be suspicious. Well, what's she really up to, right? So it doesn't matter if you gave him the sun, the moon, and the stars. Often you want the more challenging person to make the first offer. So that's one of the things I would say. The second thing I would say is, and I'm not saying this because I think divorce lawyers need more work or anything like that, or that I'm, on the side of all these other divorce lawyers who aren't me. But one of the things is you do not want to enter into an agreement or have an agreement where you haven't sought legal advice. And the reason why I say that, and lawyers are created all differently, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the thing is that in my experience, most of the time, husbands, payors, and it's not always like that. Most of the time it's like that. They actually are pretty shocked and upset about what they have to pay. Women are often shocked and shocked and amazed at what they're entitled to. Okay. They actually don't realize what they're entitled to. So that kind of our overall patriarchal culture, well, that permeates our marriages and our relationships and all of that. Right. So we could end up, and particularly if we're in a marriage for a period of time where we might not be respected as much as we should have. See, the thing is that often when we've been together with someone for a long time, and we actually forget about our own, and we maybe have tried to appease our spouse so much, we actually forget about our own value. And so that's permeated our own worth and what we're entitled to, right? So until you get a good head on your shoulders about that, and you just want to get the legal advice. And sometimes people are so worried about money. Yeah, but a lawyer is going to cost me thousands of dollars in my world or pounds in your world. I don't want to do that. The thing is that what you can do is you can even sit down with a lawyer for an hour or two. Maybe you don't want to retain them. Maybe you don't have the money. You don't want to throw thousands of dollars or pounds out the window, but you still can say, how much is it for a 1 hour or a 2 hour consultation? So then at least you can be armed with the information that you need. So sometimes people they end up in the interest of saving hundreds, they end up giving up thousands, right? And often when women are in midlife, so you're not 22 anymore. And so what ends up happening is they can end up making some pretty big decisions that could have a massive impact in their future, not realizing it at the time.
Yeah, it's key, that, isn't it? It's that getting all the information so that you have the full picture.
That's right. I'm just thinking about a client that I had. She was married for 35 years. She was so relieved to get out of the relationship because she actually couldn't imagine living out of her husband's control. Like for her, like, whoa, I'm going to get to go out for coffee with my girlfriends, and I'm going to get to buy my own scarves. And he's not going to tell me whether or not I can go to Starbucks or not. Like, cause he was highly controlling. Right.
Mm.
So when she left, she's like, oh yeah, no, you can have the house. I don't care. No, you take the pension. No, that's okay. You know, so she's walking away. She's like living like a peasant, literally leaving behind a lot of money on the table. And then it's like a year or two later, she's like, wow, well, poverty sucks, you know? And then of course, realizing that, you know, it wasn't 100% his house. He thought it was, but it wasn't 100% his pension. He thought it was.
Mm.
So that kind of thing.
So what's the biggest mistake that women often make when it comes to divorce? Is it that one? Is it, you know?
Yeah, like I would say like not getting the legal advice, like at least, you know, in the interest of saving money, that they actually don't get that they don't get their needs met.
Mm.
Also, another, and then, so that's number one, making the first offer. That's another one that's hugely, it can be a big problem. A third one also is sometimes, you know, when they hire, who they choose as a lawyer can be very, very important. And let me tell you, so sometimes people think, oh yeah, I want to go to Joe Blogs or Miss Blogs because they really fight for me and they really told my spouse off. And I was so glad, man, you know, they were put in their place. Really? Well, how much did that cost?
Yeah.
So like if if you're coming out of a marriage and it hasn't worked out, here's what you have to give up is the thought of, at least in your ex's eyes, about them going, oh yeah, you know, you're right, I was a jerk and you were so nice and I gave up so much by not treating you well and I am terribly sorry. So you just have to give that up. It's never going to happen. And if it does, fine, but just don't hold on to that. When you hire, what you want is a lawyer who is not afraid to settle. Okay, you want that. You want a lawyer who starts with a settlement process, whether that be four-way meetings, mediation. I don't know what they call it in the UK, but basically
Mediation.
Okay.
We talk about mediation.
Okay, great. Okay, so you want someone who starts there, but is not afraid to go to court if necessary. Right? But you don't want someone, you know, I'm thinking about this one lawyer a lawyer in my community, city, who, you know, like, you know, mops up the floor with the other client all the time. And so his clients are like so pleased about that. And I'm thinking, at what cost? Like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like when something could have been settled in a day at mediation, like, I mean, is it really that satisfying? Is it worth it? That kind of thing. So you want to hire. So a big mistake is hiring a lawyer who's a table pounder without the reputation for settling cases. You want someone who's going to go to bat for you, but not at, you know, all costs. Or, you know, you want a lawyer who's like going to, and then so that makes, there it is.
It's so refreshing to hear a lawyer saying that, because I mean, I've been through a divorce process. I ended up in court, not because I wanted to be in court, but because my husband was, you know, just was not willing to do mediation. We just decided to be completely combative, unfortunately. And we collectively, well, I was paying his bills because I was the earner. When you are unable to reach settlement, when you are not able to do the mediation bit, you are just burning down the money that is left to split between the two of you. So it's a very short-sighted way of engaging. However emotional you are, or however awful it's been, you're just giving your money to the lawyers.
Yeah, totally. And you know, and some cases, and I would say very rare, like sometimes you have to go to court, like, but it's like a last, like in my jurisdiction now, we can force people to mediate. Actually, we can actually serve them with a notice to mediate and saying, you have to come.
That's
order to
amazing. I could have done with that.
well, and the thing about that is that of course, you're going to have someone furious with the mediation process, right?
Yeah.
But and it won't be a fun day, but it's a day mostly, as opposed to 5-10 days in court. It's just a fraction of the cost. And yeah, and I would say, like, in my office, we probably open up, well, 100 to 150 files a year, something like that. Sorry, a year, something like that. And I would say we go to court on a Supreme Court trial once or twice a year.
Right.
Like, that's how rarely we're going to trial on our cases. Last year in 2018, I went to court 3 different times on cases, like 3 different trials. And that's the only time I've ever done that. I've gone to trial 3 times in a year in 3 decades, 2 decades rather. Yeah. So and what happens, and in those cases, every single time the other party had a personality disorder, right? So it was like we couldn't reason with them, right?
Yeah.
And those, and that's kind of so you want to be only in those cases are the ones that should go to court. Sometimes you just need a judge to say, nope, this is the way it's going to be, and you need to stop arguing about it.
Just to remind viewers, if you do have a question and you're happy to ask it in the comments, please go ahead. Val is here. She's here for a bit longer and can answer the questions you have. If you want to be anonymous, you can try and message me. When I look over here, I am looking at my messages just to see if there are any questions coming in anonymously, and that's okay as well. And I think also, Val, if people have questions after this broadcast, are you happy to sort of take those questions?
Totally.
Send them over to you. That'd be great.
Totally. Yeah, no
so
problem.
I'll circle through the comments and through messages as well. So, don't hesitate. This is your opportunity to get your questions answered. So, I think we've probably already touched on this a little bit, but how best can a couple keep the legal fees down?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay. So, when you have your meetings with your lawyer, okay, when you're about to meet your lawyer, what you want to do is you want to have, whether that be a binder or whatever, all your materials in one spot. So it constantly, so your 3 most recent income tax returns, if you have a house valuation or an assessment on your house, that bank account balances, bank account numbers, credit card statements, like you just want to be able to have all of that stuff, right? So in what's, in a almost in a presentation folder. So often, and this is like, lawyers make lots of money at this, but we don't want to make money at this because it's not very fun for us. Is writing to you saying, oh yeah, and by the way, remember how last time I asked you to bring on those 3 income tax returns? My clients are like, oh yeah, I forgot. I'm like, why would you forget? Like, just get all your stuff in order. Also, kind of a 1-pager with a chronology of events. When I say chronology, I'm not saying 6 years ago this happened, because that's a moving target. You would say, we met on January 4th, 2003. We got married February 15th, 2005. Our first child, Emma Jane Thomas, was born January 7th, 2006. Joseph, blah, 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 was born, so all that information is there. Your full name, your date of birth, your spouse's full name, their date of birth, your email address, their email address, so that the lawyer is not spending time, valuable, expensive time, hunting down this information. So that's one way of saving legal fees. Another thing to remember is that your lawyer is not your friend, and they're not your therapist, and they're not very good.
Oh yeah.
Right? And so what happens is, and you know what? Like I don't know what it is. I think I love my clients. I really do. And the thing is that what can end up happening. Oh yeah, and by the way, I get how this happens, because I have, on a different matter, I have a lawyer, and I once had a 3-hour meeting with her, and I think a lot of it was about my feelings. And in retrospect, I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? I should have gone to my therapist for that. Right?
And you should have known better, shouldn't you?
I know, totally. And so exactly, do as I say, not as I do. No. So yeah, so you just want to make sure that, they, and I'm not saying, but here's the thing, sometimes people are so, the context is also really important as well. So sometimes people are so, this is costing me a lot of money, I want to save as much time as possible. So they almost get a story out really fast so that it doesn't cost them too much money, blah, 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 right? That actually their lawyer also does need, so it's like a balance. They're not your friend, they're not your therapist, but they also do need that background information. Like,
yeah,
before this call today, I was at a pre-mediation meeting. And one of the things I knew from my client was that her husband had very narcissistic tendencies, and so that gave me lots of information about what would work in terms of a settlement. But she wasn't. So I was glad I had that background information, because when we were doing the mediation preparation with the mediator, she wasn't mentioning that. And the mediator was saying, oh, so you believe dad should have a say in things? And the mom's like, yes. But I'm going, no. Dad's never going to, she just needs to get on with, like, in that particular dynamic, what would happen is mom would send the dad all these lengthy emails saying, this is why our child should be going to this school, like work hours on an email. And then he would say, he wouldn't respond. She'd follow up. There'd need to be a decision made. He'd say, fine, you do whatever you want anyway, passive aggressive response, right? So the thing is in that situation, that, multiply that for baseball season and hockey season. And, just the mom's doing all this work and the dad's just sitting back, not being helpful. And so, like, okay, you know what, in a situation like that, mom just needs to make the decisions and advise dad, right? As opposed to, that's what needs to happen, right? And so your lawyer having a context is going to be very helpful as well. Hope that question answered that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That's such valuable advice. And yeah, I mean, people just wouldn't think about it. So thank you very much for that. That's brilliant. So how long do you think it takes women on average to move on from divorce? What, in your experience, what do you think?
Well, this is what I want to say that's the most important to remember, is that in my experience, no matter how broken, sometimes, like, my clients, when they first come to me, they're broken, the Kleenex, and they're sobbing and they're shaking and they're so destroyed. What I can say 100% of the time is that all of those clients, no matter what a mess they are, they have always healed, right? They've always, not one of them went, even when they didn't choose to pull the pin on the marriage themselves, the guy's gone off and had an affair or something, codswalloped with the information. They always come back eventually and say, oh, I didn't realize what a gift this would be, like 100% of the time. So that's one thing to remember. And what I would say in my experience, the first year is the hardest, because you have a lot of firsts, the first, anniversary, whatever. Yeah. But it kind of depends on the woman too. There's kind of two kinds of clients I see. One that doesn't say, they both come to me often in excruciating pain. So there's no difference there, like they've both had their butt kicked and they're going, I don't know what my life is going to look like now. It's like an empty slate. I had this picture. My picture's been ripped up. Now what? And then there's the kind of woman who her mindset is, well, that's just the way life is. And my life didn't turn out the way I planned, and life is crappy. And that's just my lot in life, you know, just kind of, you know, and they're the ones that take a lot longer to heal. And then there's the other women who they also going like, this sucks. I have no slate, but they start looking around like, what can I do? What can I explore to get through this? And they're the ones that I find recover the fastest, where they're able to, it's not that they hurt any less, but they're able to transform their pain and get through it to the other side much more efficiently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a sort of contentious thing, isn't it? It's so difficult. I mean, I remember, I mean, even though it was me that left the marriage, it was devastating, absolutely devastating. And then the legal process was horrible. And as I say, those first anniversaries are very difficult. And the first Christmas, it was difficult, very difficult.
Yeah, totally, particularly when you have children as well, you know, and
so much to deal with, haven't you? But it does get better, and you do heal. And it's very interesting that you say that women come back and say they never realized what a gift it would be. Because that's very empowering, isn't it, actually, that often these things can be so terrible for us, and yet they end up, you know, becoming something really actually quite good.
Oh, totally.
And a good place to move on from.
Oh, yeah, totally. You know, and I'm just thinking about one client I had, you know, she did everything for her marriage. You know, she always like looked after her fitness. She ate, tried to, you know, she just did all the things for her husband. And when they were first married, I think her children were 3 and 4 years old. He had an affair with her best friend. And ouch, really destroyed her, like turned her inside out. But you know what? She forgave him. That, you know, obviously she didn't hang out with her friend anymore, but she kind of like got past it, but always kind of had that in the back of her mind about, you know, trying to do her best in the marriage. So blast forward, I want to say 25 more years go by, 20 years go by. And so she's going to spend the day at the spa with her daughter. She's so excited. And she's going to go away for a weekend. That's what it was, a weekend. She comes back. There's a note on the table. Guess who started the relationship up with the woman he had the affair with years before? Her husband and her old best friend got back together.
Oh, no.
And so this is how she comes to me. She is,
oh my goodness,
I'm not like kind of a very attractive woman, a shell, right? Sobbing, right? Anyway, and so you know, she got therapy. She was a stay-at-home parent their whole marriage. So she went out into the workforce. Very scary to do, a very intelligent person, but you know, like wasn't used, like it's very intimidating. She was in her mid-50s to go out into the workforce. She hadn't done that since she was married, you know, so, you know, more than 30 years before. And so like bit by bit, you know, so now I just got to share. So she's, you know, on fire. She's got like, she lives on an island. She does art and sells art and is part of this art community in where we live. There's lots of islands, and she has a hot boyfriend who's like, I don't know, younger than her, and having the time of her life. And then looking at her, and of course that relationship, when he left her for the other woman, that woman, that lasted a day. And her husband wanted to come back to her. And she's like, no, that's not happening. We're not doing that again. And but what ended up happening for her was that she realized that how much of her that she wasn't in her marriage, right? Like how she really was always trying to appease him and make him happy, that she didn't realize that there were any bits left over for her. And so she was able to find those bits, you know. It's just really a beautiful, and watching her, you know, transform. It's been very inspiring. So
I think that's a classic thing that women do, isn't it? And I certainly did it in my first marriage. I became the wife that he wanted, and I stopped being me.
Yeah, totally.
And it took me a long time to come back to being me and finding myself. And I remember saying in another interview that I did recently that looking back at pictures of myself in the latter years of my marriage, because I was married for 13 years, the latter years of my marriage, and looking at me now, I was much better looking after my marriage ended than I was during my marriage. And that wasn't because I let myself go. It was because, I don't know, I wasn't me. I just looked completely different. And I had molded myself to sort of his expectation of a wife.
Totally. And that's something that happens so often. And even me, like, this is the crazy thing. So I separated from my husband about 6 months ago, 7 months ago now, 8 months ago now. And what, okay, so I'm a divorce lawyer. And I got a really, I was with him for 18 years. I wasn't expecting that in my own life. And I chose to end the marriage, but I would say I was constructively dismissed. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was unbearable, right? And what I didn't realize was how I moved in our home, how I spoke. Shocked. This might be shocking, but I'm a loud person, right? And I stopped being like that energy because that he didn't like that about me. The very things that he fell in love with about me, he didn't like anymore, right?
That often happens, doesn't it?
And I tried to kind of compact myself into someone who I tried to put a lid on who I was. And it's so interesting because then I gained all this weight. It's almost like it was going to come out. My largeness was going to happen some way. It was either going to be through my voice and the way I moved, or it was going to be in my butt. I don't know. So that's all recovering now slowly, but it's I didn't realize how much I was tiptoeing around and not being myself, right?
Yeah. Wow, this is fascinating. Yeah. So are there any particular issues that you see occurring in midlife divorce or breakdown, relationship breakdown, or,
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think that, first of all, I want, women to understand, like, there is a perception in our culture, and we can make a decision to accept that perception or not, because it's also bullshit, is that women, when we're going through midlife and going through a separation, that we're somehow less valued or less valuable on the market, as it were, or, like there's the misogynist term. Do you guys have the misogynist term cougar?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and so what I know is, okay, so getting involved in that interpretation or that understanding, that's a decision. You don't have to do that. And what I know is that when women actually don't even follow that narrative and, choose to step into, because here's the thing, we know things I'm 52. We know things now that, I wish I knew when I was 26. Can you imagine? Right?
Yeah.
But there's only one way to know that, is to know it, right? To go through it, and that is very attractive. So the more we know about our attractiveness, the more attractive we become. That's just the way it is. So that's what I would say is that don't think that we're at some kind of a low or that it's a bad time to separate, or that we're somehow less valuable, because actually the opposite is true. And again, when I see my older clients, they're on fire. If that's their mindset, they are on fire,
It's also that idea that, we have all this baggage, all this negative baggage, and we take on that sort of narrative. I know when I, first started dating after my divorce, and I had a young son, and I sort of almost bought into that idea that, he was baggage, until I thought about it. I thought, he ain't no baggage. He is a wonderful contribution to somebody's life.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he then became,
Yeah.
So
that's actually a really, really great example of that, because It's interesting. When my husband and I first met, he had an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old. And like we were together 18 years. So a lot of what we were worked. And people would say to me, well, don't you feel, bad that he comes with all of that? And I'd be like, well, he's in his 30s, or that he has all this history. And I'm like, well, he's in these 30s. Of course I hope he's got history. It'd be weird if he didn't.
Yeah.
And his children, for me, were not a, like when then we had a child together. And even when I was pregnant, people would say, oh, don't you wish that you had, that this was your first experience with each other having a child? And I was like, what? Like, I don't even think that way. And with his children, I thought that was great, that they have moms and I got along with their moms and everything, but like, that's not, it's just all part of the richness. And that's a way to look at it. Baggage or richness, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's like my approach to wrinkles on my face. I love them because it's the map of my life, and experience families and children and just everything. It makes us who we are, doesn't it?
Totally. Yeah, completely. It's very, completely. I agree so much.
So I think I just have one more question for you. That I do know someone has asked about this.
Yeah.
And it's when you have a particularly difficult other half and you cannot get them to talk, you can't get them to compromise at all. Do you have any tips for trying to do that, trying to get them to talk, trying to get them to appreciate that it's actually in their best interest to talk without going to court and having to be combative?
So you're saying that the separation has happened, and is it okay? Yeah.
But they can't get to an agreement because it's going backwards and forwards, and there is no movement, and it's at a stalemate.
Right. Yeah. So in a situation like that, that's when you do have to have some kind of a mechanism for decision making. So what you can't do is this, right? Because that's a very expensive place to be. Your lawyer writes a letter to the other side. The other side says why your position is stupid and what's wrong with it. And then they write back, and then you write back and say what's wrong with their position. It just goes back and forth. That can be a very expensive, frustrating, and not productive way. So in a situation like that, you have to get to a mechanism where there's a forced decision. So that can be, sometimes I don't know if you guys have settlement conferences with judges in your jurisdiction or not, but okay.
Not that I know of.
Yeah. Okay. So sometimes, so what? And
I didn't get divorced here in the UK. I got divorced in New York.
Yeah. Right. Very different. So one of the things, for example, what we have is something called a mediation arbitration process. That's where we do a mediation on one day. And if we don't settle, that mediator gets to make a decision on another day. Right? So let's say you're fighting about a parenting schedule and division of assets. You meet for a day and you try to come up with an agreement. And maybe you've settled everything except for what the actual schedule is going to be for the children. And you haven't figured out, what's going to happen with certain assets. Well, now the mediator takes off their mediation hat, which is let's try to get these people to come to an agreement, and puts on the hat of arbitrating. So I don't know if you have that in the UK, but it could be.
It's probably something similar. Yeah, I don't know exactly what it would be, but
it forces people. What it does is it forces people at the mediation stage to know, well, if I don't make a decision here, I'm going to have to, this mediator is going to end up deciding for me. That's what you need to do, is have someone to decide for you.
Yeah.
And also going back to that person where they say where they're kind of stuck. I don't know where they are in the process, but if the other side's not coming to tables, get them to, and they don't want to go to court or fight, just say, get them to make an offer. Don't you make the offer, get them to make an offer saying, tell me what you want by, give them 30 days, or I'm making an application to court, right? So they know they have to get their shit together, putting it bluntly.
Okay. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with
Yeah,
my
thanks.
audience. Been
Yeah,
brilliant.
and I'll get you to, you put it in the notes or whatever, but it's val@valhemminger.com. If people have some questions for me, I could
Brilliant.
either like just video an answer to them.
Yeah, it'd be
Obviously,
fantastic. Thank you. What I've done actually is in the comments, I've put a link to your website because you
perfect.
also, you have services and community, don't you, for midlife women who have gone through divorce.
That's right. I call us golden goddesses, goldengoddesses.com. Yeah. And,
Oh,
and
God, I
yeah,
need to find that one. As well then. Hang on, let me
yeah.
find that
Or
one.
you can even, it's even available at valhemminger.com. If you go there, you can, it'll bring you to it as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so obviously I can't give any legal advice in outside of British Columbia, Canada, because I'm not authorized anywhere else.
Mm.
But I'm certainly happy to, because I've literally acted for thousands of women going through this process, and I have a very, I think, a pretty clear understanding of being able to help you get through that.
Yeah.
As a human.
As a human, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So I've got both the links I've put in the comments to
Okay.
your personal website and to Golden Goddesses as well.
Thank you. That's great. And I think, and if people wanted to, there's a like a 10 steps to transforming your, like when I was saying there's the two kinds of women, the women who are kind of like woe is me and they kind of stay stuck more, and the women who want to transform. I've got a manual, like a 10 step. This is
Yeah.
what the women who do to kind of get through it faster.
And interestingly, that doesn't just apply to divorce, that applies
No,
to midlife, I think. I very much think there
totally.
are those kind of women in midlife, the women who just think, well, it's not that bad, but it's not great, but I'll just kind of stick
Yeah.
with it.
Kids
And the
have
women who go, no, I'm going to do whatever I want now.
Exactly. That's such a good analogy because, like kids have maybe moved out or they don't need us as much or whatever, right? And yeah, so some of us could just be sad on our Facebook feed and others are saying, well, okay, now I'm going to do something else because it's not over yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that it is over for us for
Yeah, thanks,
today.
Rachel.
Val, thank you so much. This has
Yeah,
been
thank
such a
you.
pleasure. And everybody, if you do have comments or questions, please put them below the video in the comments, or send me a message if you want to be anonymous with a question. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and thank you very much, Val.
Okay, thank you. Mwah. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye bye, everyone.